going to implement passwordless authentication using AWS Cognito, AWS Lambda, and AWS API Gateway. The basic flow of passwordless login is as follows. The user signs up with an email address and is then added to a user pool. Next, the user receives a unique challenge, which can be used to verify that the user has access to the email address they provided. When the user provides us with the correct challenge, the user will receive tokens which can be used to verify that the user is authenticated, on which the user can access, for example, an API. Cognito is going to handle the biggest part of the authentication for us. Cognito manages user pools and provides several functionalities for sign up, sign in, and sign out. Later on in this course, we will use the AWS Amplify library, which will handle actions we want to take in the front end. The Amplify library will assist us in storing the tokens provided by Cognito and refreshing them before they expire. We are going to create 4 Lambda functions that will assist us with implementing the passwordless login functionality. We are going to create a pre-signup function, which will automatically verify users and add them to the user pool. Then we'll build the define all challenge and create all challenge functions. These functions will check if the user has a valid challenge, and if the user does not provide a challenge or any challenge at all, it will create a challenge. This challenge will then be sent to the user. The last function we will create is the verify all challenge function. This function will check if the user has the correct challenge, and if the challenge is correct, it will issue a token to the user. Later on, the token will be used to verify that the user is authenticated before an API endpoint can be called. So first we have to create our user pool. When you go to your AWS Management Console, you can search for Cognito. And there you create a new user pool. We'll name our user pool test. We have to check allow email addresses. This way users can sign up using their email address and use this as a username. We can uncheck all the password requirements. Cognito requires us to provide a password when someone is signing up. This will be a random generated password, as we will not use it after the user is signed up. Next, you can skip a couple of steps. We're going to make use of the command line interface to access the Cognito API. To identify ourselves and get access to the user pool we created, we need to create an app client which will supply us with a client ID. This client ID will be added to the commands in the command line interface and will be added to the code in the front end later on. We will call the app client user pool test client. We won't have to generate a client secret, and you can uncheck enable token revocation and create the app client. Over here you can view the triggers. As discussed earlier, we'll set a couple of custom Lambda functions to these triggers. For example, you have the pre-sign-up trigger, the define all challenge, create all challenge, and verify all challenge response trigger. For now, we won't set any of these triggers as we don't have any of the Lambda functions defined yet. We can go to the next step and we can create the user pool. Now that the user pool is configured, we'll create our first Lambda function. The pre-sign-up Lambda function will make sure that users will automatically be verified and added to our user pool. We won't do any checks before we verify a user because they need access to the email address they provide before they can log into our application. So now we can go back to the AWS Management Console, and there we can search for Lambda. And we can create our first function. We'll call the function pre-signup. And at runtime, we'll select Python, as that is the language which we'll create our functions with. Every Lambda function has a Lambda handler which receives an event and context as parameters. First, we'll print the event. For this, we need to use JSON dumps because this will make sure that the event is printed in the correct format and that we can use it as a test event. At the end, we'll return the event. When we implement the pre-signup trigger, we'll change some of the attributes of the event that we return. And with that, we can deploy our changes. We can now go back to Cognito, and over there we can set our first trigger. So we can go back to the user pool that we created. And here we can set the pre-signup Lambda function. It appears over here. We can set that with the pre-signup trigger, and we can save our changes. The AWS Cognito documentation provides a lot of valuable information. As an example, we have detailed information about customizing user pool workflows with Lambda triggers. We'll be using the define auth challenge, create auth challenge, verify auth challenge, and pre-signup Lambda triggers. We won't go into too much detail about the documentation, but it might be interesting to read if you want more detailed information about the custom triggers. Because we'll be working without a user interface in the beginning, we'll use the AWS command line interface to access the Cognito API. On this page, you can find information about the different Cognito commands you can use. We'll be using the sign up, initiate auth, and respond to auth challenge commands. First, we must install the AWS command line interface so we can use these commands. On this web page, you can download the installer and then install the command line interface. We can now go back to our management console and go to security credentials. We have to create some access keys which are needed to configure the command line interface. So here you can go to access keys, and then you can go to create new access keys. We'll save the keys in a notepad file because we will be needing them shortly after. So now that we have our keys set up, we can go to the command line interface and type AWS configure. There it will ask for the access key ID that we just saved in the notepad file, and after that it will ask for the secret access key. It will ask for a region as well. It's very important that you type the same region as the region where your Cognito user pool is created. Otherwise, some of the Cognito commands will fail. So for us, that's EU Central 1. And you can leave this one empty. So with the AWS command line configured, we can trigger our first Cognito trigger, which is attached to the Lambda function we created. So now we can go back to the Cognito documentation and go to the sign up part. And over there you can find some information about the sign up command and the values that you can supply with the command. The sign up command requires a client ID, which we created earlier, a username, which will be an email address in our case, and it will require a password as well. We won't use the password and the user won't use the password as well, but it's mandatory for the command, so we'll just supply a random password. Now we can go back to Cognito because we have to get the client ID, which we created earlier. And you can find that under the app client part. And we'll just copy it to a notepad so we can use it later when we give the sign up command. So now that everything is in place, we can give our first Cognito command. The commands always start with AWS Cognito IDP. And then we'll type sign up. Then we need to supply the client ID, which we saved in a notepad. And then we can supply the username. We'll use userpool tester, a Gmail account for this. And then we'll supply a random password, which again, we won't use the password, but it's mandatory for Cognito, so we'll supply it anyway. Here you can see that we get a response from the Cognito API. It already created a username at user sub, but the user is not confirmed yet. And when we go to Cognito, we can view the user that we just created. Here you can see the username as well, and that the account is not confirmed yet. When we go to the Lambda function, we can go to monitor and we can view the logs in CloudWatch, and that is where you can view the printed event. So you'll see in total 2 events here. One of the first event is an event that I tested this morning to check if everything worked. And the second one is the event that we just fired. If you expand the event, you can view the details of the event, and you can also click on copy because we'll be using this event as a test event for our Lambda function. When we copy our event, we can go back to our Lambda function, and over there we can paste everything, and we'll name our event signup test, pre-signup test, and then we can save the changes. And when we click on test, you'll see that the function executed with success using the test event we just copied. Now we want to make sure that the user is automatically confirmed and that the email is automatically verified. First, we want to go back to Cognito to delete the user we just created. We'll change some things in the pre-signup Lambda function, and after that we want to test if the user is then automatically confirmed and verified. So we can delete the user, and then we can go back to the Lambda function, go to the pre-signup function we created, in the pre-signup function we can delete the print statement we made because we already got the test event from there, and we'll add some changes to the event. We'll set auto confirm user to true. And we'll set auto verify email to true as well. We won't be needing the JSON import anymore as we won't print the event with JSON dumps, and we can deploy our changes. With the changes deployed, we can go back to the command line interface and re-execute the statement we just executed. And there we'll see that the user confirmed is now set to true. And when we go back to Cognito and check the new user in the user pool, we notice that the account status is confirmed and that the email verified is set to true. So now that the user is automatically confirmed and verified, we can start with building the create auth challenge Lambda function, which will create a unique challenge for the user, and the define auth challenge Lambda function. When you look at this overview, you can see what the custom Lambda functions will do. All these steps happen within the initiate auth command used by Cognito. The first time initiate auth is called, Cognito will create a session. Define auth challenge will determine what kind of challenge is needed. For us, this will be a custom challenge. Because we state that we want a custom challenge, create auth challenge is called. Create auth challenge will send a custom challenge to the user, preferably through an email address. And after this has happened, we need to check if the user supplies us with the correct challenge, and this will happen in the verify auth challenge Lambda. We won't build the verify auth challenge check yet, so we'll start with building the define auth challenge Lambda function. We can create a new function and we'll call it define auth challenge. And as we did with the pre-signup function, we'll first print the event using JSON dumps. And now we'll create the other function that's needed, and we'll add create auth challenge. And inside this Lambda handler, we'll print the event using JSON dumps as well. So now we have one thing left to do. As stated before, create auth challenge will only be called when we say that we want to use a custom challenge. So here we have to alter the response and tell Cognito that we want to use a custom challenge. Now we have set up both Lambda functions, the define auth challenge and create auth challenge Lambda, and we can go back to Cognito to set the correct triggers. You can go back to manage user pools, and there you can go to the triggers, and you can set up the define auth challenge Lambda function for the define auth challenge trigger, and the create auth challenge function for the create auth challenge trigger as well. We'll be using the initiate auth command in the command line interface to call the Cognito API. And this needs an auth flow, all parameters, and the client ID as well. So we'll copy the client ID from the notepad. And we'll go back to the command prompt, and there we can give the AWS Cognito IDP initiate auth command. We'll supply this with the client ID we just copied. We say that we want to use the custom auth flow. And as auth parameters, we'll give the username. And for us, the username will be an email address. And the userpool tester Gmail address we used earlier on. And this will give us an exception. This is okay because we haven't altered the response of the initiate auth command yet at the define auth challenge Lambda function. This was just meant to trigger both Lambda functions. So we will look at the CloudWatch logs for both functions. First for the define auth challenge function. That's where we can see the print was printed using JSON dumps. And you can see that fail authentication is set to null, which resulted in an exception when calling the Cognito API. We'll use this event for setting up a test event. And we'll call the test event define auth challenge test. And we'll save the changes and test it to make sure that our test event works, and it does. Now we can do the same for create auth challenge. We'll do logs in CloudWatch. This is where you can find the print of the create auth challenge event. Here you can see that the challenge parameters, the private challenge parameters, are set to null. We'll alter these parameters later so we can supply a custom challenge to the user. First, we'll use this as a test event, name it create auth challenge test, save the changes and test if the event works correctly. And it does. We'll now change the create auth challenge function so that it supplies a challenge to the user. To keep it simple, we'll just hard code the challenge for now. Later on, we'll make sure that the user receives a unique challenge. To do this, we'll add a challenge to the private challenge parameters, which holds the value of Open Sesame. And again, the value of Open Sesame is for now is hardcoded, and later on we'll address that and make sure that a unique challenge is created for the user. Now we can expand on the define auth challenge function. We want to check if the user is found and if the correct challenge is provided. If this is not the case, we have to supply a new challenge. The first thing that we'll do is check if the user is found. If the user is not found, the authentication will fail. In case that the user is found, we'll check the session and see if the challenge result is set to true. If the challenge result is set to true, this means that the challenge is met because the user provided the correct challenge. And in this case, we can issue the tokens to the user. So if the challenge result is not set to true, this means that we haven't received the correct answer yet. And in that case, we have to present a new challenge to the user. So the authentication won't fail, but we won't issue tokens as well, and then we'll return the event. We'll use the test event to check if we made any mistakes in our code that lead to an error. Here you can see that we don't get any exceptions upon firing the test event. This means that we defined the define auth challenge and create auth challenge lambda in the correct way, and now we can run the initiate auth command again, and you can see that we get a response with a session. The last function that we'll build is the verify auth challenge response lambda function. This function will check if the user provides us with the correct challenge. For this, we can go back to our lambda functions and create a new function called verify auth challenge. To begin with, we'll first print the event using JSON dumps. We'll use the respond to auth challenge command to call the Cognito API and trigger the verify auth challenge response lambda. For this, we'll need a client ID, a challenge name, a session, and challenge responses. The challenge responses consist of a username and an answer to the challenge. To make sure that the function gets called, we have to set the verify auth challenge response trigger to our verify auth challenge response lambda function. As we need to provide a session to the respond to auth challenge command, we'll run the initiate auth command again, so we get a new session. With the session, we'll run the respond to challenge command. We'll have to provide a client ID, a challenge name. This will be custom challenge as we defined in our code, and the session that we just got from the initiate auth command. We'll provide the challenge responses as well, which will be the answer to the challenge, which is Open Sesame as we hard-coded, and as a username we'll give the Gmail address that we use to test the user pool. And as you saw, we got a response from the verify auth challenge trigger, and we'll go to Cloud to check the event. Here you see that the private challenge parameters and challenge answer are both Open Sesame, so that is correct. And we'll set up this event as a test event for our verify auth challenge Lambda. We'll call it verify auth challenge test, save the changes, and test if the test event works correctly. We'll now make some changes to the verify auth challenge Lambda. We'll first try to get the challenge from the request. And so this is the challenge that we defined earlier with create auth challenge. And if this challenge is not found, we will get an exception. And then we'll set answer correct to false and return the event. In case the challenge is found, we'll check if the challenge is met, so that the challenge that the user provided is the same challenge as the challenge that we set in the private challenge parameters. The challenge that the user provided can be found in challenge answer in request. And if the challenge is met, we'll set answer correct to true, and then we'll return the event. So there's one last option, and that is that the challenge is there, but the challenge is not met. And in that case, we'll set the answer correct to false, and the user will be provided with a new challenge in this case. So we just fired the test event, and here you can see that the answer correct is set to true, because the challenge in the private challenge parameters matched the challenge answer. Now we'll repeat the initiate auth command to get a new session, and then run the respond to auth challenge command as well. We can use the new session we got from initiate auth here. And we'll give the same responses as provided before. Now when we run the command, you'll notice that we get an access token, a refresh token, and the ID token from Cognito. So these are the tokens that we'll use later on to access an API. So now we've added the verify auth challenge Lambda function to the rest of the functions. And what this function does is check if the answer to the challenge that the user provides to us is the correct answer. So if it's the same as the challenge that we created for the user. And that makes the first step of this tutorial complete. In the next step, we'll figure out how we can use the tokens that we received from Cognito to access an API. I hope you found this video helpful. Please like and subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates. Thanks for watching.